From Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to start by thanking my friend and colleague, Senator Murphy, for shining a light on this issue of corruption. Because the corruption that we are seeing from President Trump is unprecedented in scale and scope in our nation's history. It's infecting our democracy here at home, and it's corrupting our foreign policy around the world. We will soon be debating here in the United States Senate what President Trump calls his big, beautiful bill. Well, it is a big bill, but it's only beautiful if you're a billionaire or a very wealthy American, because he gives those big tax breaks to very wealthy people at the expense of everybody else in America. We've heard of the cuts to Medicaid and food and nutrition programs, and the fact that even after that it will drive a huge upward hole in our deficit. But there's one billionaire that President Trump is especially focused on making sure does well, and that's himself and his family and his family's business. And we've seen a great example of that corruption here at home with the meme coin, right? This is the coin that Trump put together, and he said that he's going to reward the people who buy the most of this meme coin by meeting with him personally at his golf course in Virginia. And so people all over the world scurried to purchase that meme coin in order to get an audience with the president, because having an audience with the president means you get a chance to influence the president. And many people from around the world, including China, purchased those meme coins to buy that influence. And people should understand that the president's business makes money, whether the value of that meme coin goes up or whether it goes down. Every time there's a transaction to buy or sell that meme coin, the Trump business makes money. So other people can get totally hosed, but it's a win-win for President Trump and his family. In fact, it's estimated that in the early days of launching this, they made about $350 million. So that's the meme coin here at home. What brings us to the floor today is how this personal corruption is infecting the foreign policy of the United States. Because all of us hope and expect that when a president of the United States goes overseas to conduct American foreign policy, they have the interests of America first. Donald Trump says it himself, America first. That's not what President Trump has foremost in his mind when he travels overseas. What he has foremost in his mind right now is the bottom line for his personal profit, literally selling the office of the presidency. You might as well open the White House and make it an Airbnb. So let's talk about the details of how this is unfolding and how it's hurting the United States of America. On his first major overseas trip, Donald Trump went to 3 countries in the Middle East, Gulf countries. Went to Saudi Arabia, he went to the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, and he went to Qatar. Now, normally before the President of the United States takes one of these important overseas trips, they send out the diplomats to help work out important U.S. foreign policy objectives and goals with these countries, to make sure that the interests of the United States of America are put first. In the case of this trip to these 3 Gulf countries, again, the first major overseas trip President Trump took, it was his son, Eric Trump, who went out to the region 2 weeks in advance. And what did Eric Trump do when he was there? Was he talking about foreign policy? No. He was talking about doing deals for the Trump family business. And so let's zero in on some of the deals that he worked on. Let's start by what happened in Qatar, because it was about 2 weeks before President Trump arrived there that Eric Trump worked with Qatar to partner the Trump Organization on a $5.5 billion Trump-branded golf course and real estate development deal. It should be pointed out that Qatar has also invested over $1 billion in a private equity fund for Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, in a deal announced in 2024 after Donald Trump's most recent election victory. And now, as Senator Murphy pointed out, then Trump asked Qatar to give him, as a gift, this jumbo jet plane to use as Air Force One and potentially to keep for later on as part of his presidential library. And so Qatar, for the reasons that Senator Murphy indicated, felt apparently compelled to comply with this wish from the President of the United States. The President of the United States has a lot of influence in the region. And Qatar has been on the losing end of that influence in the first Trump administration. And so Qatar gave Donald Trump, at Donald Trump's request, a $400 million jumbo jet, what the president calls the palace in the sky. It's complete with a 55-inch TV, leather sofas, wood paneling, the works. And during this whole period of time, Qatar has also wanted to make sure it establishes a solid relationship with the United States and specifically with the Trump administration. And the Trump administration had noticed a major arms sales to Qatar, $1.9 billion weapon package, complete with Predator drones, 500-pound bombs, and Hellfire 2 missiles. So all of this gets caught up together in the major corrupt deals that are being put forth in order to enrich the Trump family, not advance the national security interests of the United States. Now let me turn to the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, because in this case, the corruption is at least as bad, probably more so. So once again, in the case of the UAE, before President Trump went to the region, it wasn't the State Department emissaries that went out, it was Eric Trump on behalf of the Trump family businesses. In this case, it was a new cryptocurrency stablecoin enterprise launched by the Trump family called World Liberty Financial. Now, World Liberty Financial is 60% owned by the Trump family. As Senator Murphy pointed out, one of the co-founders is actually Zach Witkoff, a last name that you might know because his dad, Steve Witkoff, is Donald Trump, President Trump's major Middle East envoy, going to places like Qatar as part of the Middle East negotiations with both respect to Iran and Gaza. So 2 weeks before Donald Trump goes to the region, his son Eric Trump goes on behalf of the family business along with Zach Witkoff, the son of the president's special Middle East envoy. So what happens when Eric Trump, the president's son, goes to the UAE? Well, they soon after announced that MGX, which is a UAE government-backed investment firm, would use Trump's new stablecoin called USD1 for $1, to close a new $2 billion investment in the cryptocurrency exchange Binance. So by putting $2 billion into the Trump stablecoin enterprise, putting that into circulation, the UAE turned an unknown stablecoin company into one of the biggest players in the world overnight. Overnight, the value of that company shot up with the action that the UAE took with the $2 billion. And the Trump family stands to make tens of millions of dollars every year from that deal alone. Now, Mr. President, I doubt that the Emirati investment firm went with a Trump-branded cryptocurrency for its $2 billion investment because Eric Trump put together the best slide deck for the pitch meeting. Somehow I think it's because he was the son of the President of the United States who was going to be arriving in the UAE 2 weeks later. So I want everybody to hold that deal in their head. Just put a pin in it for a minute, right? Eric Trump, President's son, goes to the UAE 2 weeks before President Trump arrives and does this crypto deal, $2 billion crypto deal. So 2 weeks later, the President of the United States arrives in the UAE. And what happens? President Trump gives away some of the most sensitive, advanced American technology. In fact, the crown jewels of American AI technology and semicomputers. The previous administration, President Biden, had restricted the flow of this very sensitive AI technology to places like the UAE because of a fear of what's known as diversion, that technology would not be safe in the hands of the UAE without really important safeguards in place. Because the UAE has a partnership with the United States, but it also has very close relations with China, the PRC. And so there's been well-documented concern about the real risk that very sensitive American AI technology would go to China. I would also point out that the UAE has made it its ambition to become one of the AI leaders in the world, and so they obviously will benefit greatly from getting the very best technology, the highest compute power that the United States can provide them. Now, interestingly, it was the day before President Trump departed to the UAE and Qatar and Saudi Arabia that the Trump administration rolled back the important safeguards the Biden administration had placed on the transfer of this very sensitive AI technology. They rolled it back as the president was about to take off to go visit the UAE. Now, this deal that was cut, where the United States agreed to lift its limitations on the transfer of this technology, really does compromise the national security interests of the United States. Mr. President, a group of us wrote a letter led by Senator Warren. It was signed by Leader Schumer, also by the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, Senator Reid, the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Warner, Senator Coons, and others. And here's what we wrote. These deals greenlight the sale of sensitive U.S. technology in exchange for illusory promises of foreign investment. If completed, they will present an immediate threat to U.S. national security and, over the long term, may irreversibly erode U.S. leadership in artificial intelligence by offshoring American technology and jobs. So that's what the president did just 2 weeks after the UAE said it would invest $2 billion in the Trump family business crypto exchange, letting that skyrocket to very valuable levels. I will point out, Mr. President, that it wasn't only Democrats who have expressed concern about the risks of transferring this sensitive AI technology to the UAE. In fact, during the Biden administration, the Republican chairman of the House Select Committee on China wrote to the president, actually wrote to the president's then National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, expressing exactly these kind of concerns. It was a letter dated July 10th, 2024. It's a short letter. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that it be entered in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, here's an important thing for everybody to understand. When Eric Trump went 2 weeks before Donald Trump's trip, and when he did that deal where a UAE-owned company put $2 billion into the Trump family stablecoin business, that was with a company called MGX. The chairman of that company is a member of the royal family. His name is Sheikh Tahnoon. He's also known as TBZ. He's a real entrepreneur, and he does look out for the interests of the UAE. So he does this deal with Eric Trump, but guess what else he's the chairman of? He's the chairman of G42, which is the, again, Emirati state-owned business that cut the AI deal with the Trump administration. So the guy who's the chairman of the company that put $2 billion into the Trump family stablecoin business is also the chairman of the company G42 that was the beneficiary of Donald Trump's giveaway of very sensitive US AI technology. Now look, when it comes to Sheikh Tahnoon, you know, I've met him. He's a good businessman. He was looking out for the interests of the UAE when he got that deal where the United States government will give the UAE all this AI technology. So he was looking out for the interests of the UAE. The problem is that it was President Trump who wasn't looking out for the interests of the United States of America. He was looking out for the interests of his family business and literally gave away this sensitive technology 2 weeks after the UAE invested $2 billion in the Trump family newly launched stablecoin. And at the same time, like in the Qatar situation, this was accompanied by a request from President Trump for a $1.3 billion arms sale to the UAE. Now, Mr. President, that arms sale is part of the overall corrupt bargain that the Trump administration struck with the UAE. It also ignores what the UAE is doing right now as we speak with respect to the terrible war and conflict in Sudan. Because the UAE has been sending weapons to an organization, a murderous organization called the Rapid Support Forces. The Rapid Support Forces have been engaged in all sorts of atrocities. And during the Biden administration, President Biden met with the UAE leaders and asked for assurances that they would no longer be providing weapons to this murderous group and thought he received those assurances. But the reality is, right at the end of the Biden administration, at my request, I asked for a briefing, and it turns out that the U.S. has determined that the UAE is continuing to provide weapons to this murderous group, which the United States government has found is committing genocide in Darfur as we speak. And so on top of all the corruption that's part of this deal, we have the Trump administration greenlighting an arms transfer to the UAE. At the same time, the UAE is transferring weapons to a murderous group in Sudan that is committing genocide. And here's what the State Department's own assessment says. The Rapid Support Forces and allied militias have systematically murdered men and boys, even infants, on an ethnic basis, and deliberately targeted women and girls from certain ethnic groups for rape and other forms of brutal sexual violence. Those same militias have targeted fleeing civilians, murdering innocent people escaping conflict, and preventing remaining civilians from accessing life-saving supplies. So there are lots of reasons we shouldn't go forward with this arms sale, partly because it's part of an overall corrupt deal with the Trump administration, but also because of the UAE's ongoing actions. So let me really close with this, Mr. President. We do expect the President of the United States, when he travels overseas, to be looking out for American interests. In this case, it's very clear President Trump was going out to look out for his own interests. In the case of the Middle East, it doesn't even seem that he raised the issue of the genocide in Sudan during his trip to the UAE while he was following up on the corrupt deals. And the president also, I think people will remember, said he was going to end the war in Gaza on day one, that he was going to bring back the hostages and end the absolute awful humanitarian disaster we're witnessing right now, with literally hundreds of thousands, not millions, of innocent Palestinians dying of starvation, civilians. But instead of looking at working the Gaza issue or these other foreign policy priorities, the president was there for himself. And it's sending a terrible message. Other countries are getting that message. Reports say that Vietnam is making way for a Trump Gulf complex to get lower tariffs, and that Serbia is demolishing a historic building to fast-track a Trump hotel in Belgrade. Mr. President, we cannot allow our foreign policy to be corrupted in this way. And the one way we can send that signal and that message right now is by voting yes on these joint resolutions of disapproval on these arms sales, because they're part of the overall corrupt package. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I now yield the floor to my friend, the senator from Vermont.
Well, let me thank Senator Van Hollen for his leadership on this important issue, and thank Senators Murphy, Kaine.
Senator from Vermont
To me, I think.
is recognized.
Thank you. Let me thank Senator Van Hollen for his leadership on this issue, as well as Senators Murphy, Kaine, Merkley, and Schatz, who are leading the effort to make sure that we pass these joint resolutions of disapproval. Mr. President, joint resolutions of disapproval are about denying military assistance to countries who break U.S. and international law. That's all they're about. Respect the law. Don't break the law. These resolutions before us today would prevent multi-billion-dollar arms sales to both the UAE and Qatar, precisely because both of these countries have violated U.S. and international law, and allowing these sales to go forward would be a dereliction in the duties of the United States Senate. Let me take a moment to say a few words about these countries who would receive billions of dollars in military aid. As it happens, both of these countries are strongly authoritarian, anti-democratic governments that repress any forms of dissent. We talk a lot about protests here in the United States. Well, they don't have protests in Qatar. They don't have protests in UAE. You protest, you go to jail. These are countries who exploit migrant labor. And these are countries who treat women as third-class citizens. In the UAE and Qatar, where the ruling families are worth many hundreds of billions of dollars, there are no elections, there is no freedom of the press, there is no freedom of speech. The ruling families of both of these countries are among the wealthiest and most powerful oligarchs in the entire world. Mr. President, in the UAE's case, in recent years, they have provided extensive military assistance to the so-called Rapid Support Forces in Sudan, the RSF. This paramilitary group started the bloody civil war in that country and is responsible for numerous horrific atrocities that, among other things, have contributed to the famine and starvation that is currently taking place in that country. In January, the U.S. State Department concluded that the RSF, supported by the UAE, the country who would get weapons if we are not successful in opposing that, has committed ethnic cleansing. I'm not quite sure why we would support arms to a country involved in ethnic cleansing. Clearly, the actions of the UAE are in violation of U.S. and international law. There is no reason, therefore, that we should be providing billions more in arms sales to this country. The other arms sale we are objecting to today would go to Qatar, a country which has also broken U.S. and international law. Qatar has channeled hundreds of millions of dollars into a wide variety of political organizations in the Middle East, including the Hamas terrorist organization. And I am no understanding as to why anybody in the United States Senate would be voting to support a nation providing military aid to a nation that has provided financial assistance to Hamas. And while Qatar deserves credit for attempting to facilitate a ceasefire in Gaza, it should also be noted that the political leaders of Hamas have resided in Qatar for many years. But, Mr. President, there is another very serious problem regarding military aid to both Qatar and the UAE. Both of these countries, in a variety of ways, have attempted to corrupt our political system and the President of the United States in violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution and United States anti-corruption laws. I find it interesting, as I'm sure millions of Americans do, that President Trump's first major foreign policy trip was not to Europe to reaffirm our long-standing alliances with other democratic countries. It was not to visit our neighbors in Canada or Mexico. No, instead he chose, on his very first foreign trip, to go to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. Now, why was that? Why would the President of the United States go to visit countries that are run by oligarchs, are strongly anti-democratic, and oppress the rights of women? Kind of funny places for a president, the so-called leader of the free world, to visit on his first foreign policy trip. Well, I think we now know the answer to that question. Trump went for the money and to secure business deals for himself, his family, and his cronies. Shortly before Trump's visit to the Gulf, an investment firm owned by the UAE announced that it would use the so-called stablecoin issued by World Liberty Financial to facilitate a $2 billion cryptocurrency deal. World Liberty Financial just happens to be 60% owned by Trump and his family. So by making this deal, the UAE was effectively giving the Trump family $2 billion in cash to invest as it wishes and keep the proceeds. Even conservative estimates of such a sum would generate somewhere around $85 million in profit a year for the Trump family. Think about that. The UAE is directly giving the Trump family some $85 million a year. Now, what did the UAE get in return? They don't give away $85 million for nothing. In Qatar's case, That government announced during a Trump's visit that they would give him a $400 million luxury jet for use as Air Force One, which he plans to keep for personal use after he leaves office. Necessary security and communications updates will cost the taxpayers of our country millions of dollars and take several years. So if this plane is actually ever used by the U.S. government, it will only be for a year or two. But that is really not Donald Trump's concerns, because he gets to keep this flying palace, this $400 million plane, for use for himself and his family forever. Not a bad gift, $400 million plane. Once again, it is pretty obvious what Trump gets from this deal. Not quite so clear how the American people benefit. Qatar also announced that it was just coincidentally financing a $5.5 billion Trump-branded golf course and invested another $1 billion in Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner's company just for good measure. Now, what are these authoritarian governments getting in return for the many hundreds of millions of dollars they are funneling to Trump and his family? Well, it could be the arms sales we are talking about today. It could be other policy priorities of these governments. For example, just 10 days after the UAE crypto deal with Trump, he lifted restrictions on the export of advanced AI microchips to the UAE, which had previously been limited over security concerns. That delivered on a long-standing UAE priority worth billions of dollars to its leaders. But the deeper truth is we really don't know what these authoritarian foreign powers are getting for their bribes. But we shouldn't have to be asking these questions. This is precisely why the Constitution of the United States and U.S. law make it illegal for presidents to accept gifts from foreign powers. Mr. President, the truth is that the autocratic leaders of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar have perfected the art of channeling money to Trump and his family as a way to buy influence and get what they want. Our job is to say no to providing military aid to one country which is involved in horrific policies which are resulting in famine and starvation, and another country which is making huge amounts of money from side deals with the president. Let us support these resolutions, and I yield the floor.